Well, hello and welcome back to Jones Financial Talk. Listeners, this is Nick Jones from Jones and Associates Premier Financial Solutions. As always, if you'd like more information about what you hear on this fine show today, you can reach out to us in a couple of different ways. One, you can just give us a call at 541-500-4321, or you can go to our website at jonesfinancialtalk.com. Lots of great information on there, including our radio page, which many of you listen to, hopefully, and go back to reference. And on that radio page, you can listen to this fine show on many different mediums. You can also request topics on our show that Tony Shore and I, my co-host, can take care of for you on any given weekend when we are recording. And so, anyways, the reason why we're going to get together and talk today is we are going to finish the second part of our two-part conversation on typical mistakes that people make inside IRAs or individual retirement accounts. We covered about 10 of those on the last show, and we've got another 10 that I think you will find very interesting. These are main topics that many clients and prospects ask and talk to us about. And so without further ado, Mr. Tony Shore, I'd like to welcome you again to the show so we can talk about these awesome topics with our clients today.
Yeah, definitely. I know last week's show was good. It was packed full of information. We got about halfway through the list of mistakes to avoid when it comes to your IRA, retirement accounts, especially your traditional IRAs. And we'll recap some of those for our listeners as well. I know, Nick, if you want me to, I can run through the list of what you talked about.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot. You talked about waiting. Number one was waiting until the 11th hour to contribute to an IRA. People start much too
Bad
late.
idea.
Yep. And number two, you said assuming Roth IRA contributions are always best, which in
Not the
many
case.
cases, yeah, in many cases they may be, but not necessarily. Everybody's situation is different, and you probably need a little of both. You said also you said you should. Some people out there make the mistake of thinking, IRA contributions are an either or, Roth or traditional. Again, that leads into our last one, which was both. Also, you talked about making a non-deductible IRA contributions for the long haul. So you need to, if you earn too much to contribute to a Roth, you said, you might say, hey, you got to look at taxes. You got to look at all your possibilities. You also talked about assuming that a backdoor Roth will be tax-free. Not necessarily. You talked a little bit about backdoor Roths. And then you also, regarding that, talked about how if you have substantial traditional IRA assets, some people make the mistake and assume, well, then a backdoor Roth is off limits to me, but it might not be so, right?
There's a lot built into all these little technical things of the IRA specifically. It's a phenomenal tool, but there's so many different things that unfortunately are, if not done correctly, just add insult to injury. So you were correct, Tony. Lots of good topics that we covered. Yep.
Yeah, and not contributing to a Roth later in life, forgetting about spousal IRA contributions.
Yep.
Maybe people delay IRA contributions because of short-term considerations. So we covered a lot, and
Yes.
I think this is an important topic. Obviously, a lot of people out there have Roths or have IRAs or traditional IRAs, and maybe they don't, and they should. So talking about IRAs is important, but avoiding mistakes with them is also important. And that's why I think our listeners should be always working with a financial professional like yourself, correct?
Yeah, and if you listeners were flabbergasted by all the things that Tony just kind of
I
named
just
off
rattled them off.
of our first show, I mean, that's why it's so important to work with somebody, because there are so many different changes every single year in the tax code that can affect the way that you invest funds inside retirement accounts, which, for most people is their largest asset outside of their home. I think we talked about this on the show before, but in the United States, there is something like $13 trillion inside IRAs today. And so this is just a huge asset for many, many people. And speaking of that and thinking about other things that you would want to avoid or at least consider, one of the things I wanted to start with on our show today is missing out on the chance to fill holes within your IRA. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, most people that come to our firm have their investments at a 401k before they use an IRA. And in many 401k plans, you might have just a very limited amount of options to utilize. Maybe some stock and bond funds, maybe what are called target date funds, but there's not a lot of choice. And so, you can always keep your 401k plan in place or use an IRA with a 401k or completely rebalance into an IRA to do what? To fill the holes within your investment plan. And so a lot of people look at IRAs as a useful, completer portfolio, meaning you just have access to utilize so many different investments inside an IRA that are just not available today inside the 401k space. And so that's a huge thing. And many people want to be able to utilize different investments. And that's a big thing and a big topic, Tony.
Yeah. Well, and you people do miss out on the chance to fill those holes. The IRAs can be really useful, as a way to, fill those areas of your portfolio or your retirement income. And a lot of 401k plans offer some good things, but they might be missing exposure to a lot because usually they're pretty simplified.
Yes.
And they might not be actively managed like something within an IRA could be if that you work with somebody like yourself, and you work with independent investment firms that have active portfolio managers that you can call and talk to on a daily basis if needed. And then your clients don't have to worry about it, right? Our listeners wouldn't have to worry about it. They don't have to worry about the stock market going up and down because they know their money is in an actively managed account, and they can pick from a lot of different offerings, not just like high risk, medium risk, and low risk, right? A
That's
lot of
exactly right.
401k plans are really locked into just something simple like that, aren't they?
They are, and for good reason, because they don't want to give investors too many different choices that could hurt them. But they
Right.
also typically don't provide investments that have special protection or upside potentials like we can offer.
Sure.
And an example of that too is, the next topic that I wanted to bring up is doubling up on tax shelters inside your IRA. A lot of people think, okay, whatever I want to use inside the IRA, this is a great investment. I'm going to use it. But in certain situations, if you choose the wrong type of investment that is a tax preferred investment, it's not helpful. So an
Yeah.
example of that is municipal bonds, for instance, Tony. Municipal bonds and also limited partnerships, master limited partnerships, and different oil and gas investments, for instance, have some great tax advantages already. And you don't
Right.
need to put those inside a retirement account. You would want to leave some of those specific investments outside of retirement accounts to get the additional tax benefits. If you put them inside the retirement account, now you're actually hurting your return potential because you typically won't get as higher returns in some of those things for keeping them in that manner. So very, very important point to make that while you have tons of different investment options inside IRAs, that doesn't mean that you should use everything there. And you got to make sure that you are choosing the right investments for each type of taxable account that you have.
So, for example, like I know you've mentioned before, municipal bonds. They're a
Right.
good example of something you would not want to put in an IRA, right?
That's right. Because if you're already getting a tax break to utilize those, what are you giving up? Typically, you're giving up higher yields and better returns,
Sure.
right? Because it's
Sure.
tax free. Well,
Yeah.
if you already have investments that are pent up inside an account that is, growing tax free, why would you use those same investments inside of those? Sometimes it might make sense, but right now, for that specific example, it does not, Tony.
Yeah. Sure. That's good, and of course, every situation is different. So that's don't some people double up on tax shelters within an IRA when they shouldn't. That doesn't benefit them. What's something else? What's another mistake we should probably avoid with IRAs?
Well, and kind of on that same vein, not paying enough attention to asset location in an IRA is just as important. And so, if you're going to choose to use some type of investment inside a traditional or Roth IRA or a cash account, um, it's very valuable to make sure that you're taking full advantage of the taxation situation. So, higher yielding securities, Tony, such as high yield bonds and real estate investment trusts, the income from which you get those investments is taxed at ordinary income tax rates, may be a perfect fit for something like a traditional IRA. Right.
Right.
Because you're already going to take distributions in the same way from those types of investments and pay the same taxes as you would inside that traditional IRA. But things like stocks, for instance, which have, probably the best long run appreciation potential, may be a better fit for something like a Roth IRA, which offers tax free withdrawals and doesn't impose, RMDs. But more importantly, you don't pay on any of the growth potential there. So,
Yeah.
the first example of a high yield bond or real estate investment trust, if you're going to make somewhere 7, 8, 9%, that's great. But that's a way different taxable situation than if you have NVIDIA stock, like everybody's talking about today, that's
Sure.
appreciated 40, 50, 60% this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Think about the taxation in something like that
Yeah.
grows that much. It's a phenomenal opportunity for growth, but there's tax situations involved with that. So if you own something like that NVIDIA stock inside a Roth IRA, and have everything organized correctly, guess what? You don't pay on the gains.
Yeah.
So
Huge.
if you're not talking about that,
you had 50% gains on your NVIDIA stock this year. You're not going to have to pay taxes on those gains like you would have in a traditional or, if it's in a Roth, right?
in a Roth IRA, that's
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
not paying enough attention to how you own those investments from a tax standpoint is extremely important and a huge error that I see many times.
Yeah. Yeah. And now this next one, we've talked about this a lot on past shows, right? You wanted to talk about RMDs. That's a big mistake people make, right?
It is. So RMDs from traditional IRAs, which now start listeners at the age of 73, can hurt you for sure if you're not doing them correctly, right? And so you have to take advantage of, when you're going to take those RMDs, which parts of your portfolio you're going to use for the RMDs, and what things you should use. Depending on if you need the RMD, how often you need it for income, for instance, or if you don't need it, that could potentially help your advisor determine what types of things you would want to own inside your traditional account to help facilitate and fund the required minimum distributions that you make. That's a big thing for sure.
Well, yeah. Yeah, you got to be strategic. And I know that you really have harped on the fact that you got to work with a financial professional to get your RMDs straightened out. Those traditional IRAs, Uncle Sam makes you take distributions out after a certain age, right? And you said,
Yep.
what, 73
73
now?
is the year. And and that leads me to the next thing too, Tony. Everybody's situation is completely different. Right. And another error that I see with RMDs, for instance, is just not reinvesting the unneeded, distributions that you're taking from an IRA.
Yeah, what you
Right.
do with that distribution.
That's right. And so, retired investors might worry that those distributions, will take them over their planned spending rate for their portfolios, for instance. And so, if you don't need it, and typically for people that are at RMD age, you're going to take somewhere between 4 and 6% out of your account on an annual basis. But is there a workaround is the question, And so, yes, if you're working and you have earned income still, you could reinvest some of that money into a Roth IRA. But more likely for most people, Tony, take that money, put it into a tax efficient asset inside some type of taxable account. So we do this with lots of clients. We open up a joint account for them and their wife. For instance, they start taking the required minimum distributions. If they don't need the required minimum distribution or don't need all of it, we pay the taxes on it to the feds and the state, and then we roll the difference into another account that is an investment account that will continue to grow in a different tax manner.
Yeah, tax free, and that's where I want to jump back. I skipped right ahead to RMDs because I wanted to ask you about that. While I thought about it, I know that's a big mistake to avoid. People make mistakes with RMDs, and the penalties are high too if you make a mistake with an
They're the
RMD,
highest
right?
in the IRS tax code. They used to be 50% of the RMD amount. Today, they're 25%, which is still a huge number.
Yeah, that's still huge. But now, backing up to, I know you wanted to talk about triggering a tax bill in an IRA rollover. You just mentioned something like that, like taking the money that you have to take. There's no way to get around to taking your RMD or paying taxes on it, really.
That's right.
There's if you want to keep the money yourself, there's no way. We'll get to other things later, but. And so you said maybe rolling it instead into a tax deferred account. What about if I want to roll money from like a 401k into an a traditional IRA,
Yep.
or any type of IRA, that can create a tax bill for me, right?
That's right. So the purpose of this question and answer, Tony, is, it's not complicated to roll money over from a 401k to an IRA or from one IRA to another. Okay. It definitely should be a tax-free event. However, I see it on a very regular basis with people that are not our clients, that have run into a situation that is very possible to trigger a tax bill on an early withdrawal penalty, for instance, if you take money out with the intent to do a rollover and the money does not actually make it into the IRA within the stipulated amount of time, which is 60 days. Okay. So a lot of people take money out, and if they don't get it in, if it's 63 days after they have pulled that money out, then now that's a taxable event. And so what are the ways that we can talk about avoiding this? And why is this so important? The main differences here with rollover money, okay, is an indirect versus a direct rollover. So a direct rollover is where you transfer money from one institution to another. You don't touch the money. And you can do as many of these direct rollovers as you want in a 12-month period. And that is the best way, typically, to not trigger some type of tax bill because of the way that you've taken money out of this account. That keeps it in the same tax free event situation as long as your advisor has set that up correctly and you've done it correct. If you do indirect rollovers, this is where it does not transfer from one institution to another, but you actually get a check, right? You get those assets in your name somehow. That's an indirect rollover. You can only do that one time every 12 months for that specific amount of money. And in that situation, the onus is on you to be able to make sure that money goes back into that tax-free event account within a 60-day period.
Yeah, yeah. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to pay a penalty probably and taxes.
The taxes on that. That's right.
Yeah, on that money. Yeah. So rollovers can be tricky, but as long as you do them the right way, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it can be a tax-free event if you roll it over properly. And so you don't want to trigger a tax situation, a tax event. And to avoid that, I think our listeners need to make sure they're working with somebody like yourself before doing this and make sure they know what's happening. I know you help your clients with this. Let's take a moment. We need to take a break here to let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you. I know you're offering a no charge, no obligation consultation, and they can come in, meet with the staff, meet with you, and get a plan in place, get something started, or get a second opinion on where they're at, and ask questions about what they have in their 401k or their IRA. Make sure they have a plan moving forward for their retirement income. How can they do that, Nick?
Yep. So two different ways. You can just pick up the phone here in the Rogue Valley and give us a call at 541-500-4321, or go to our website, jonesfinancialtalk.com, to request any information that you'd like from our firm that you hear on the show, or questions that you might have, or any help that we can provide. That's what we're here for. Please take us up on that offer, listeners.
Yeah, for sure. JonesFinancialTalk.com is the website. Check that out. And there's also links to a lot of your different things there. You have a lot of resources, and I think that's awesome. I know you have a book as well, The Knowledgeable Retiree, right?
I do. And the reasoning behind that book and what I put together was to help people understand why you would want to utilize a financial advisor. And if you are searching for one, the things that they should be sharing with you.
Yeah,
Right. Not everyone is equal. You have to have the resources at your firm. You have to have the knowledge that we share on our show on a weekly basis to make sure that this is done correctly. And then clearly you have to have a good relationship with that person. But what I'm trying to say here, what I tried to do with the book was explain the process that we go through, and how thorough it is so that you completely understand what steps are involved and how that's going to work. And so we provide that to all of our first appointment prospects to make sure that they understand from the beginning, the type of planning that we're going to do for them, the things they should be asking if they're not going to work with us, for instance, and
sure.
and why and how those things are built. So, yep, thanks for bringing that up, Tony. We have
Yeah,
plenty of
no.
those books we'd like to share with our listeners for sure.
Well, definitely. And, you can go to Amazon and buy one right now, or you could pick up the phone and give Nick a call or go to the
Yep.
website and fill out your information. Somebody will get a hold of you and say, "Hey, I heard about it on the show. I want a copy of Nick's book." And they'll get you a copy. If you come in for that complimentary consultation, you can get a copy. The phone number is 541 500 4321. It's easy. It's 541 500 4321. And also the web address is it's easy, isn't it? jonesfinancialtalk.com.
That's right.
All right. Well, now back to our list and what we're talking about today. We're talking about IRA mistakes to avoid, and a lot of people make IRA mistakes. We know this. What's next on the list?
So we talked a lot earlier, Tony, about required minimum distributions, the age of which, when to start taking them, penalties, things of that nature. I think another very important point that I want to mention is the planning behind those. A lot of people assume that they're just going to talk to their advisor in the fourth quarter about required minimum distributions. Well, it's correct that you need to if you haven't yet, because if
Right.
you don't, there's penalties. But what I'm trying to say here is, we've got plenty of clients that have huge required minimum distributions, 50, 60, 70, $100,000 a year they have to take out. And if that's the situation, don't you want to adequately plan that throughout the entire year rather than having to make a decision very quickly in a month or two, let's say? And so the reason why that's important is there are many strategies that you can use for those required minimum distributions and things that you could use that money for. We've talked a lot about this before, but qualified charitable distributions is at the top of the list for many of our clients.
Yep.
And the reason why I bring that up is, you can tell your financial provider to send a portion of your required minimum distribution. And in this year, it's up to $105,000 that you have the ability to send directly to the charity of your choice. Okay. And the reason why you want to do that directly is because it reduces your adjusted gross income. That tends to be a much more beneficial, tax effect than actually taking the deduction after you take the money out of there. And so, there's a bit of a disconnect between required minimum distribution ages and qualified charitable distribution ages, because the IRS, for some reason, continues to change these numbers and they don't keep them accurate. And so here's another perfect example of why you want to talk to somebody about this. Qualified charitable distributions are available to people who are 70 and a half today or older, whereas required minimum distributions don't start until the age of 73. Okay, so just that little nuance and a 2.5 year difference in your age can make a huge difference on if you're going to give money directly to the charity or not. And Tony, lots of my clients know that they're going to give money to charity, and that's exactly why we talk about these types of things throughout the year and multiple reviews, so that they can adequately plan how they're going to do that. Because let's say, as an example, that they want to tithe to their church. And let's say that they go every Sunday, and every Sunday they tithe to the church. At the end of the year, then they think about their required minimum distribution and they go, darn it, I could have just given the same amount of money right out of my IRA without paying any taxes on it because it was qualified going directly there.
Then they
But
wouldn't have to pay taxes. If you write a check out to a charity or a church, you're missing out on a tax benefit.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so why not plan that throughout the year?
Yeah.
More importantly, why not make sure that your advisor is asking you the right questions about these things to help benefit you in a good way? I mean,
Yeah.
clearly you want to give money to charity, but don't you also want to get the best tax benefit from doing that? It's very simple if it's just explained to you and done correctly.
Yeah. All right. We've got a couple more. What's next? What's another
Okay.
mistake you want to talk about?
So the next couple are huge. And the reason why they're huge is because of current tax laws that actually could change next year, depending on who becomes the president. But for now, this is what we know. You got to pay attention, and a lot of attention, to who you name as your IRA beneficiary inside these accounts. If you do not do that, and if you don't have very carefully drawn up estate plans to make sure that this goes to the people that you want it to go to in the best fashion for them, you're going to do a huge disservice to the people that inherit your money. You got to be sure to keep your beneficiary designations up to date. You also have to be aware of all of the new rules that can come out related to required minimum distributions, and also when people inherit IRA monies, especially if they're not your spouse, you have to know what the tax ramifications are depending on how you organize that, Tony.
Sure. So make sure you pay attention. And this is in general, but especially with IRAs as well. Look at your beneficiary designations on any type of account, but especially your 401ks, your IRAs is what I've heard you say. And I know you really hammer that point home, Nick, on all our shows. It comes up a lot. You got to double check your beneficiary designations, make sure they're correct, because they take precedent, as you say, over a will. That's a great point. And I think people need to know that. I didn't know that, and now I do. I take them very seriously. And a lot of people just kind of set it and forget it. And then life happens, things change, and they don't change their beneficiary designation. Now, what's our final tip for the day?
So the final one is this, clearly many people do not watch tax changes that happen inside investment accounts, because how would you know? Right?
Yeah.
Congress passes all these different tax laws all the time and can change things on a dime. And so if you don't properly name the right person as your beneficiary, the tax implications can be enormous and terrible for your beneficiaries. Everybody
Sure.
assumes that if they've done a trust or a will, that it says who's going to get the money and that's sufficient. But there's two pieces of that. Tony just mentioned the first, which is making sure that your beneficiary designations are correct. But the second part of that puzzle today is tax rates, because after 2019, tax rates changed. There's a tax rate that's different for your spouse, that then again is different for your beneficiary if they're living, like your children. Okay. That is then again different if the money is actually going into a trust. And so the tax rates are different in all those, and how quickly they have to spend the money out of the account is different in each of those scenarios. If you don't do it correctly, you don't organize things the way that you should based on tax law today, you could be giving away 50% of the money that's sitting there just because of that situation.
Yeah. You don't want to do that. Well, you know what, Nick? Wow, these last two shows have flown by. We covered a lot of IRA mistakes to avoid. Great tips, but we're out of time. Before we go, let our listeners know how they can get a copy of that book and set up a consultation.
Sure thing. They can just go to jonesfinancialtalk.com to request that book or to set up a consultation. If they want to talk to us directly, they can do that here in the Rogue Valley at 541-500-4321. Great number to call. Once again, 500-4321.
All right. And that does it for today's episode of Jones Financial Talk with our host, Nick Jones.